Okay, welcome everybody. This is the second episode of the podcast series Youth Justice in Question. My name's Andi Brierley. We've got with us Devon, Ferns, Sean, Creaney and Kierra, Myles. And this podcast is going to look at the second tenet of the Child First principles. And the second tenet is to develop pro-social identity for positive outcomes for children involved in the youth justice system. So on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you over to Sean Creaney, who's just going to set a bit of context for this podcast discussion. Sean, if you could introduce the tenet, please.
Thanks, Andy. Welcome everybody to episode 2 of the podcast series. As we mentioned in the previous episode, the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales have adopted a child first approach. In terms of the first tenet, as we mentioned last time, that's about seeing children as children, so prioritising the best interests of children, for example, recognising their particular needs, capacities, rights and potential. The second tenet, which is the focus of the episode today, is about developing pro-social identity for positive child outcomes. So what that means, according to the YJB, is that it's about promoting children's individual strengths and capacities as a means of developing their pro-social identity for sustainable desistance, leading to safer communities and fewer victims. The YJB also say that all work is constructive and future focused, built on supportive relationships that empower children to fulfill their potential and make positive contributions to society. In relation to that particular tenet, I myself have undertaken some work with Professor Stephen Case quite a while ago now for the Beyond Youth Custody site. We wrote a blog, and in it what we argued was that desistance is concerned with how professionals assist children to move away from crime and live a fulfilling life. Now, this is a point that we will be discussing today in the episode, that it's really important that we subject concepts like desistance to critique, and we don't take them at face value or take those concepts for granted. Nevertheless, arguably, attention is not directed at achieving short-term change, so rather it's about this longer-term transformation. So there is a difference arguably between primary and secondary desistance, but certainly transformation is a key part of this particular tenet, and the main focus is on promoting positive outcomes. Now, of course, the youth justice services, as we mentioned in the last episode, there's around 154 youth justice services, and the main focus is to prevent offending and reoffending also. And with this tenet, the argument is that that can be achieved through developing positive relationships. That can be achieved through focusing on this longer term transformation. And in terms of change, not only change in terms of individual, but also structural as well, because we shouldn't solely focus on agency. We need to also acknowledge that the wider context whenever we're working with a child or a young person. Now, arguably, positive outcomes are more likely when the decision making is shared. This is a point that we're going to be looking at today, that actually in order to achieve positive or longer term transformation, then that process has to be shared where both parties feel that they have an opportunity to be able to input into the process. So it is about, crucially, it's about relationship building. Of course, these tenets are separate. However, they overlap as well. So in terms of developing pro-social identity for positive child outcomes, then that can only be achieved through a positive, constructive relationship. And that's something that we'll be looking at a bit more today. So I'll hand back over to Andy.
Okay, thanks for that, Sean. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the context for the 3 questions that we're going to put to the colleagues, if that's the right term, and because a lot of the focus of today's podcast is going to be about relational work. So I thought the best way to say it is to just look at a quote by Fergus McNeill that found its way into the evidence-based paper for the Child First Principles to outline the YJB's principles. And that quote is, "It is through quality of relationships formed between the professional and the young person or child, rather than the content of any intervention, that real progress can be made in the prevention of future offending." And I thought that would be a quote that would probably fit nice within what I'm assuming are going to be some of the responses to some of the questions that we're going to ask the guys. And remembering that some of the guys in the podcast today have got a dual perspective of being young people involved in the youth justice system and also working now with young people involved in the youth justice system, which is an interesting perspective. So first, Devon, I'm going to come to you, if that's okay, with your nice background and guitars. So the first question, really, to think about the topic, which is promoting a pro-social identity, we're going to talk a little bit about offence-focused work. So my question to you is, from your dual perspective, do you think offence-focused work has a place in youth justice?
That's a very good question, and I'm quite curious to see what other people are going to answer to that. So I think there is, some sort of place for it, but if I'm sort of thinking, so like my first initial thought is, Asset Plus, that is very offence focused. But when I look at that and I read a couple of questions in that, so for example, one of the questions is, can you identify ways or things to not offend? Now, if I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a young person, if a practitioner's just asked me that would subjectively tell me that they think I'm an offender. So in my mind, I'll be then thinking, first of all, who are you to say that? But second of all, how am I going to almost connect with you and put myself in that position after you've just assumed that? And when we go back to sort of the principles and the tenets and stuff, like, does that align well? So like, in my opinion, I'd say that, some focused work would be more of a barrier to the relationship, really, if that answers the question.
Yes, it does. I'm just going to follow that up with another question, if that's okay, Devon.
Yeah, cool.
So Devon, you're talking about the self-assessment element of Asset Plus and how it's got a number of prescriptive questions that the practitioner is to ask the child. And one of those questions is, can you see reasons for not offending in the future? And what you're saying is, or at least what I think I'm hearing, is that actually that could be that question in itself. It might not promote a pro-social identity because there's an assumption that you see yourself as going on to offend in the future. Is that right?
100%, yeah. And I can't remember once in my life waking up in the morning and thinking, you know what, I'm going to offend today. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. Right.
And then so sorry again. So I'm going to do another follow-up question then. So if you think about those self-assessment, which feeds into the assessment for the youth justice system, what kind of questions do you think would be more appropriate to allow a practitioner to do whatever the assessment looks like? What questions do you think, from your perspective, would be more appropriate to ask a young person? Sorry if I put you on the spot there, Devon.
I mean, personally, this is kind of like, this is something that I feel like should be adopted in most assessments that happens with young people, is that I feel like we just need to gather their opinion and their voice. I think they need to construct them questions themselves. So, for example, if I was to give one now, it'd be something along the lines of, if you could personally, let me try and word this in a way that's a lot more young person friendly, that identify. So it'd be sort of like, in your opinion, what sort of things implements what you do? So that question's a lot more broader then. That's not saying, why do you offend? That's not me saying you're an offender. That's me saying, what is it that kind of informs what you do?
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. So a more broader question that would just allow, rather than a prescriptive one, that would allow almost like them to create a narrative in terms of their response.
Yeah, 100%, because each
open-end Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to come over to Kierra then. So go back to the question then. Do you think offence-focused work has a place in youth justice practice? You're on mute. Someone were going to do it.
I don't think that offence-focused work in that broad term where you're looking at anger management, drugs and alcohol, offensive weapons as a toolkit, I just don't think that that kind of work is effective. And drawing on what Devon said there, I know young people that I work with that will tell you I'm a drug dealer, but they don't see themselves as offenders or criminals because all they've ever known is drug dealing. That's what they've grown up around. That's their path. That's how they see that they get loyalty, respect, a group of friends. They've got some element of control over their life because they've got somebody phoning and messaging them and relying on them. So for them, that feels, they don't see that as that they're an offender. But I think that offence-related work, so when young people talk to me about that stuff, I'll have a conversation with them all, you know, a broader conversation about what it means to be a drug dealer and how that can get them into trouble with the police, which they already know about. Or, you know, I've got young people that will say, I'm not going to carry a knife, but I'll carry a hammer. And opening the conversation to what an offensive weapon is and how that hammer could also cause a lot of damage to someone, but not telling them that, getting them to think about it themselves. And quite often they know the answers to this stuff, and that is offence-related work because we're talking about offensive weapons, but my intention isn't, right, let's sit down and have a conversation about what an offensive weapon is today.
That makes perfect sense, and that resonates with my practice as well, is that actually many young people that are involved in offending, they often like to talk about offending behaviour in the way that they frame it. And I suppose as a pro-social adult, your natural organic conversation is to allow them to have that conversation and to challenge it in a subtle and organic way, as opposed to a formal group setting, which I've done as well, but I found that to be less effective than the stuff that might be done in the car, or might be done when you're taking them to school, or might be done when you're going for a walk around the park. So that resonates with my practice as well.
If I hadn't taken time to build a relationship with these young people, they wouldn't feel like they could speak to me about that stuff. So developing a relationship, which can take time, is the drives, and actually getting a young person, some young people in your car to go for a drive in the first place. That takes a bit of time because I'm not getting in your car. But why am I going to come out with you? So that takes time to develop. And it's only through that relationship that they're going to start talking about that. And you have to allow them to talk, like you were just saying, is I hear conversations get shut down all the time. And, you know, that you have to allow young people to talk, because if that's their life, that's what they want to talk about. Yeah. And until they feel like you can handle that conversation, they're not going to open up more and get to more about how they really feel, rather than just, this is what it is.
Yeah, so I'm going to come over to you in a minute, Sean, as well, and get your view on this. But I think that's a really critical point that you've just made there, Kierra. Is I think when I've heard that often, it's often that the practitioner is not necessarily comfortable having that organic conversation and having the skill sets to be able to have it without it feeling that they're colluding, and challenging it in an organic way through relationships. Because actually shutting somebody down in any context is paradoxical to relationship building. There's a way to do it, and shutting people down certainly isn't the way to do it in my view and practice experience. Sean, so just a quick one. Do you think there's a place for offence-focused work in youth justice practice?
Thanks, Andy. a really important question, that, because obviously youth justice services focus on harm reduction, so harm in terms of that the child presents, but also the harm that they potentially are subjected to as well. So there's a focus on harm reduction. I think for many years, practitioners have been trauma informed, have been child focused long before the YJB's Child First was introduced. But what's been disappointing over recent years, and I think a frustration for many practitioners, is this heavy focus on making sure that children, young people participate in anger management programs or other types of programs, rather than the focus on actual relationship building, as Kierra has mentioned there, which is obviously so powerful and so important. Actually, trauma-informed practice, or as Kierra will talk about as well today in this episode, positive constructive activities, whether that's related to music, the arts, etc. Actually, all of that work is so crucial, involving the child as much as possible, make them feel a part of the process, etc. All of that can come under the banner of offence-focused work. It's just that we're not using those labels, offence-focused work, because we're aware of the problems. Particularly, it can be counterproductive. Obviously, if a child embraces a so-called offender identity, actually that's counterproductive. But also, this is a point as well that I'm sure Kierra will add some insight into, that desistance is a negotiated process, and it takes time to build that positive, constructive relationship. There's no such thing as a quick fix. It's one size fits all. We shouldn't be looking at that. What we should be focusing on is actually personalised types of support. And like I said, seeing desistance as a negotiated process, working with the child or the young person, and arguably that is the best approach in terms of preventing offending and reoffending. Actually focusing on those, as we mentioned in the episode last week, those underlying issues.
Yeah, okay, really good point. And I think obviously Youth Justice has gone on a journey. When I first started in Youth Justice, we were doing things like burglary programs and car crime programs. I mean, you think about building a pro-social identity, you're sticking for 15, 16-year-old kids in programs called car crime program and burglary program. It's just not a structure that's going to set somebody up to start seeing themselves as a contributing member of society, is it? So brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to lead on to the next question then. I'm going to come back to you again, Devon, if that's okay. So the evidence suggests that the practitioner and the child relationship, as Sean kind of touched upon there, is critical for building desistance and a pro-social identity. So firstly, do you agree with that? And from your kind of dual perspective, what does that look like? How can we get those relationships to be improved within a youth justice setting?
Yes. So first of all, I 100% agree. So from my experience, from sort of a young person point of view, so kind of when I went through the system and stuff, I was having, professionals sit me down and do these sort of interventions, but it was the times that I spent with them outside of that on their own where I felt like I actually made the most development. And I think that's because once you've had that time to develop that relationship, I need to feel connected to you, to vision what you're wanting me to vision. And the only way that I'm going to be able to put myself in that place is if I feel like I can actually do it. And without that relationship, it's very much a tick box exercise. So what a good sort of relationship would look like. So for example, when I was inside, a lot of the staff, and especially my youth offending workers at the time, they'd constantly remind me, this is not the end, this is just a little point in your life, but what's important is this is where you can get to, this is how we're going to do it type thing. And a lot of that stuff were done through not paperwork, not one-to-one sessions on like things specifically to my crime. it was more about, actually, let's get this guitar in his hand, man. Let's have a little jam and let's talk about life and let's write a song about it. And then before you know it, I'm already thinking about where I want to go and where I want to be. And I'm seeing myself as a different person rather than, you know, when I first entered the system. So yeah, 100%. I think personally, relationship practice is the way to go. I think without relationship, you're asking somebody to do a lot without actually giving them a lot, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And that's a really good example that you went to the time in custody, because, you know, I would imagine, and I kind of know from my own lived experience, that when you're in prison, I mean, you're a prisoner. So it's sometimes very difficult to see yourself outside of that context. And it sounds to me like what you're saying there is actually less formal stuff and more everyday interactions that are not youth justice are actually the things that can help you develop your own scripts for the future, if that's the right way to term it. Does that sound about right?
Well, that's right, because it's real. It's 100% real. It's not forged. It's natural. It's organic.
Natural and organic. Brilliant. Thank you, Devon. So over to you then, Kierra. Is it important, and how can we get it to improve within a youth justice, which is a complicated setting?
So I think that you can only work with young people if you have a relationship with them. And I think this is where we start to see professionals blame young people and breach them or send them to compliance meetings, or they have to go back to court, is because they haven't managed to develop a relationship with them. They're putting it all on the young person. Whereas people, I think, who develop a relationship with young people, the young person's more likely to want to see them because actually they think they're all right. They're more likely to want to spend time with them, and they might actually believe this person might want to do something for me. And, you know, this whole word help, sometimes young people, I don't need no help. Who are you to tell me I need help? That kind of thing. But this person might help me. I want to go boxing. I can't go boxing because my parents can't afford to send me there. I can't get there. I don't know where to go. I'm not sure I want to go on my own, but I don't want to tell anyone I don't want to go on my own because I'm tough. So, you know, but this person might help me get there. They're talking about it. So they might. And I think those, if you don't have a relationship, why are they going to believe you? Why are they going to believe anything you say? Because they don't have to. And that's something that I always think back to myself being a young person is I don't have to talk to any of you people and I don't want to. So why? You need to. So I always see it as that I need to prove myself to young people. It means that I need to be there when it's hard and show that I can show up. I need to, when I know it's hard, I need to be around that extra bit more. And I'm in a different role where I can text young people in the evenings, check in on them on the weekends. And those things are really, really important for developing a relationship with children that, you know, are in and out of trouble and really struggling. So relationship is everything. And also supporting young people into, as was said, like Devon was saying about music. You know, someone sat and play guitar with him, which is his interest. I take young people to the gym, but there's other young people that want to draw. So we, you know, we've painted walls, we've got the arts and crafts. I'm not even good at that stuff. I'm like, come on, let's just get messy and have fun, you know, and let's see what we can do with it. But I think that comes from who I am as a person. So it's not, I don't have to create that person. That comes from within. But I think that everybody has that. You just have to tap into it and get rid of this professionalism side and think, you know, these are children and young people.
No, that makes complete sense. And I suppose the word that comes from what you're saying there is a little bit about authenticity, and just kind of showing up for who you are and making the child believe that actually this is your authentic self. And just to touch on that a little bit, so obviously I've been practicing for 15 years. I always remember I had a kid who I was supervising who was on the intensive supervision and surveillance program, and I had a manager and national standards at that time, and the agreement within the service that even though he was on that program, I would see that child twice a week. And he'd finished work, and so he was coming down at 5 o'clock and he was being seen because he had to be seen every day at 5 o'clock. And I told my manager that was going down on the Friday, and she knew I'd already seen him on the Tuesday and the Thursday, and she said, but you've already done your contacts. And I felt, well, you know, it's not about a contact. He's working. We've got a good relationship. I'm going to pop down and see him on the Friday just to keep him prompted for the Monday. And I'm not thinking that that's negative on the manager. I think that sometimes that's structural stuff where she's thinking, well, if you're seeing him, why are they not seeing him, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? And you've got to see beyond that when you're a professional. You know, in the end, that stuff don't make a difference. And what I'm hearing and what the evidence suggests in child first, it's not that stuff that makes a difference to children, is it? It's relationships works, and it's making them feel valued and seen, as you've just outlined, Kierra. Right, so I'm just going to pop on to the next question. Have you got anything you want to chip in there, Sean, for the child practitioner relationship stuff?
I was just going to mention, I know we'll be discussing this at length in episode 3, but making sure that young people, children, have access to types of experiential peer support opportunities, I think, are really important. And also as well, making sure that children, young people have opportunities to become peer navigators or influencers, and are able to feed into all aspects of how organisations are being run. I think that's really important and quite powerful. And I know that it is something that the Youth Justice Board are looking to further develop, that aspect of their work. But this is a point that Kierra's mentioned there as well, that actually the activities or the interventions or the approaches, they do need to be co-created. But in order for that to happen, I think from my perspective, there needs to be this conscious effort to address the power imbalances. And one way of doing that is actually, as much as possible, to see children, young people as capable of providing insights and unique perspectives on their particular situation and the experiences or the challenges, that their experiences. So yeah, just that point I wanted to mention. Thanks, Andy.
No, that's fine, thank you. So just the third and final question then, I'm going to come to you, Kierra, first on this one, if that's okay. So do you believe services that come into contact with justice-involved children particularly, do you think they're set up to facilitate pathways to desistance, or that they provide hooks for change? We've covered it a little bit, but just generally a multi-agency setup, do you think that they're set up to facilitate positive outcomes for children? And I've just add, there's different types of children, so you have children maybe that are coming out of custody and maybe preventative aspects of it as well. But do you think they're facilitated, in your view?
So I think that obviously the word change is quite interesting, and I think that's often comes from the expectations of practitioners, because every practitioner is different. So if you've got someone who's really risk adverse, they're going to want all these different changes, and you need to be able to manage your anger and deal with these situations and not do this, and don't go stand on the corner selling drugs, and you just need to leave that knife at home. So there's all of that stuff, and then you've got people that aren't as risk adverse that would like all of that stuff to stop as well, but understand that it's not that simple, and you have to support young people to. Part of it comes with maturity. So we know that as young people get older, their brains develop more, so they're able to think about the consequences, they're able to have empathy for other people. Whereas when they're 13 or 14 and they've suffered significant trauma, they might not understand why they need to feel bad for somebody else who's their rivals that's also trying to hurt them. Why do I need to feel bad for them? And that comes with brain development as well. So some of this is in science, which isn't my field, but some of it comes from there as well. So the desistance stuff as well, it's it's a process, isn't it? And I think Sean spoke about it earlier, about there being different stages to it, but it's a process, and it's about having the right amount of relationships around you to help you learn to believe in yourself, achieve what you would like to achieve. Because sometimes young people, they don't think that this is what I want to do forever. I don't see myself doing anything else. And that's where experiential peers, people that have been there before, also can come in and help, because it's like, I was once here, but look where I am. I don't want to see you go to jail. I don't want to see you bouncing in and out of there. There are things that we can do that can help you get there. Don't know if that really answers it, or if I went off on one a bit. But
No, you did. And I think it's really, we did have a conversation about change before we went live. I don't mind saying that, and we've got different views. But I think we think about the kind of context of this podcast, which is develop pro-social identities. I think language is really important. And I think about my journey through the youth justice system, and young offenders institutions, is that going through that experience makes you feel inadequate anyway. And so if we're telling people then you need to change, what we're doing is we're reinforcing that stigma. And actually what we need to do is accept people for who they are, and then we're more likely to get them where we believe, and they probably believe too, where they can get to. But if we don't accept them first, it's very difficult to expect change. Devon, let me just say one more bit. So even from the prevention stage right through, if we have this idea of activities and taking young people into different places where they're going to meet other young people who might be from similar backgrounds, might be from different backgrounds, where they're going to
They're going to learn to do stuff together that they want to do, whether that's boxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu, playing the guitar, playing football, wherever it is in that group setting. If we know that that can support young people to develop and learn about their emotions, learn how to resolve conflict, in a safe environment, then we need to be doing that earlier. And we need to not just have these 12-week blocks, which is what I always hear is 12 weeks this, 12 weeks that. They need to be long-term. We need to be able to fund this stuff longer term. And that has to come from, that's multi-agency work. That is, how do we get money together to fund these activities for young people long-term?
But even that comes back to the relationship side, doesn't it? Because if you're going to get a child from one context where they're marginalised and excluded and feel insecure and get them into football, in my experience, or get them into boxing, or get them into these pro-social activities, somebody's got to be going on that transition with them, because it's often a very, very isolating place to feel that they're going from one place to the other.
We'd never leave a young person on their own, though, going through that journey. It would always be done with the person that they have the relationship with.
Yeah. So even that development of pro-social identity through activities is still grounded in relational practice, isn't it? Okay, Devon. Yeah. So do you think services are set up to facilitate pathways and assistance from your perspective? And do you think there's been a development from where you started to where you are now?
I think 100% there's been a development, 100%. And as you guys were kind of talking, it was taking me back to a time when I'd not long since been released, and a certain professional who was working with me at the time said that I needed to try a little bit harder than before, in terms of like before I went inside to when I'd come out. And as you mentioned that, it kind of took me back a little bit, because it put me really, really back into them shoes where I was looking at this professional thinking, well, first of all, who are you to tell me that I need to change? Who are you to tell me that I need to try harder? Because we didn't know each other when I was trying beforehand. And who are you to kind of measure that, really? And when we talk about sort of developing a pro-social identity, that did not make me feel like a pro person. Not at all. It kind of made me feel like, hang about a minute, you've just come into my life. I've just tried so hard for 2 years to put myself on a really, really good foot and come out and get a job and do really well. And you're telling me that I need to try harder and I need to change, man. Like, work with me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, let's get on a level. Let's see where I am now. Understand the journey, and then you can join me, and we'll take it together. Rather than not understanding my journey and trying to steer me down a path that you don't really fully understand yourself. That's kind of where I've kind of come from it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've worked with services who have been brilliant and really got on a level with me, but there is unfortunately some that maybe not support that as much. Yeah, I don't want to waffle on, but.
No, that makes complete sense. And I think listening to what both of you have said there, that the theme to some degree has been a relational practice, and how valid it is within the process of getting somebody to see themselves as a contributing member of society. But language actually has come through quite clear from both of you about how not using the right language can be internalised for children and not promote a pro-social identity. So I think Sean might have just disappeared then. I think what we're going to do now is we are literally going to wrap up, because we didn't want any of these podcasts to go over half an hour. I think we just have touched on that. So what I would like to say is thank you, everybody, for coming and listening. Obviously, the next Tenet, the next podcast that we do is going to be around collaboration and participation. So we'd love to see you there. And I don't know whether, Sean, you've got any, because you've just come back, any kind of final remarks before we go?
Hopefully our listeners have enjoyed this particular episode. The episode next time, as you mentioned, Andy, is on collaboration. So we will be talking more about experiential peer support opportunities within youth justice and the importance of lived experience as well.
Okay, so guys, thank everybody for coming, and we will have the next podcast out probably by the end of September, early October. So thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate your time, and see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.